all hormone imbalances stem from something I like to call health debt. Basically, the energy supply of your body is no longer meeting the energy demands of your body. And that's when we really start to see the body compensate by pulling energy from different systems.
I am very excited to chat with Bria Gadd as we are going to talk about hormone imbalances, something that pretty much applies to everyone. One time or another, I think many, if not most of us, deal with hormone imbalances.
We can get thrown into this health debt if we're having something going on in the gut. If we're not breaking down and absorbing our nutrients, then suddenly we don't have the nutrients to make any of the hormones, not just the sex hormones, but the thyroid, the adrenal. And that really is stressful on the body because it works like an orchestra. So suddenly one thing goes off and that's where these imbalances start to come from. Stress is the biggest energy sucker of our body. We see people under much more chronic stress these days, and that significantly depresses the production of our sex hormones, which is also why we're seeing symptoms of perimenopause earlier and earlier in women than before. And we're seeing the impact of that. The adrenals and the thyroid work quite closely together. We're seeing some major impacts on those. And of course, the sex hormones are really impacted by the thyroid hormones. So it massively matters how we manage stress in our lives and also how we reduce it.
I do want to ask if you have any hormone hacks, hormone balancing hacks.
That's a great question. So
let's go a little bit more into your background. So how did you start doing what you do now? How did you become the period whisperer?
I love it. Yes, I will try to summarize this for everyone. You know, I got into like nutrition and fitness as sort of a nutrition coach and fitness trainer, you know, in my late 20s when I was having babies and trying to find a way to feel good and also do something from home. That was really a big driver for me. And it was where I really fell in love with, I think, health and working with women specifically on kind of finding time in their life to prioritize themselves. But then around the age of 37 for me, first I noticed a shift in my clients. A lot of my clients were around my same age box, which I think is pretty common. And first I started to notice shifts in them, like not getting the same results, just not having the same energy, maybe having some actual like cycle issues with their menstruation, fatigue, things like that. And I remember thinking, what is going on? And then all of a sudden it happened to me. And I thought, Dr. Eric, I was like, I don't have everything figured out. Like I'm a mom, it's challenging, there's a lot to figure out in life, but I'm like, I thought I had my fitness and nutrition sorted. And it really kind of looked, started at sort of a low grade fatigue and then major energy drops, changes in my cycle, digestive issues. And the real kicker, I mean, all of those things should have had me at least go and get checked out. But it was my sleep that went, and I'd always been a super sleeper, but suddenly I just started to feel like I was waking up every night in a sweat. And, all the things that kind of come with that, like what I call undeserved weight gain, where you're not changing anything, but it's changing. It didn't make any sense to me. So I did head off to my healthcare practitioner and have, all the blood work done and all the questions asked. And she was really quite great. But in the end, she was like, Bria, you're the picture of health. And I remember thinking, if this is the picture of health and I'm 37, this sucks. I don't think I can do. I mean, it was a pretty dark moment, I have to say, but that was really what I was like, okay, I'm missing something here. And those days, I'm almost 44 now. So, 7 years ago, like nobody knew what perimenopause was. Like I had never heard of it before. And like these days you can't open Instagram or anything without, seeing something about hormones or perimenopause or menopause, which is great in many ways and overwhelming in others. But that was a real pivoting change for me where I was like, okay, I have to better understand what's happening. And because of my cycle changes specifically, I was like, let's start with hormones. And I really just learned so much better understanding functional health as opposed to, what our doctors look at, more of that physical health and really what was within my control and just the lack of understanding and education in this area for women. And that kind of just pivoted my career and my education to really specialize in this area and help women understand what's happening in their body and know what they can control and what they can do to get the support that they need.
All right. Well, that is awesome. Thank you for sharing. Are you sleeping better these days then?
Oh my gosh, yes. It's so I feel better now in my 40s than I did in my 20s. But yes, sleep is, Yeah, absolutely much better and it's so important.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is, just for overall health. So, why do so many women have hormone imbalances? I'll just start with that
Yeah.
quick, simple question, but not so simple answer.
Yeah. I think that what I have seen in my practice and in my own journey, pretty much all hormone imbalances stem from something I like to call health debt. And health debt, in my mind, is when basically the energy supply of your body is no longer meeting the energy demands of your body. And that's when we really start to see kind of the body one compensate by I think pulling energy from different systems, but certainly shut down non-essential personnel in the name of kind of survival of the body. And that's when we see shutting down of the reproductive hormones a little bit more, when it really just kind of slows and conserves. So when we're in this health debt, we have to look at where is it really coming from, to kind of answer that question of why so many hormone imbalances. And certainly it comes from, of course, the fact that we're, I think, inundated by stressors more and more in our life these days, like from our environmental stressors, from our food stressors. But also, I think, we can get thrown into this health debt if we're having, something going on in the gut. Like if we're not breaking down and absorbing our nutrients, then suddenly we don't have the nutrients to make any of the hormones, not just the sex hormones, but the thyroid, the adrenal. And that really is stressful on the body because it works like that orchestra. So suddenly one thing goes off, and that's where these imbalances start to come from. So I think it's quite easy and common to fall into them, especially if you're not paying attention to your body and what it's saying to you.
Yeah, that is true. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more about gut health. We'll definitely talk more
Yeah.
about the importance of the gut
Yeah.
and how it affects. You mentioned nutrients. You're right. If you don't have a healthy gut, if you don't have healthy stomach acid, you're
Yeah.
gonna not be able to digest.
Detoxification. Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. So now again, I did my research. I listened to some episodes of your podcast prior to having you on, just like I do with everybody. And you spoke about metabolic typing.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about what metabolic typing is for those who are unfamiliar with it?
Absolutely. So I think I don't know about you, but one of the most common questions I have always gotten being in the wellness space for women is like, what should I eat? How much should I eat? Give me a nutrition plan kind of thing. And I get that, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And most women are pretty great at that. But I always find like the answer to that is really so individual and personal dependent. And where metabolic typing really comes in is it helps us understand the rate that you as an individual, that your cells turn food into fuel. So if you have a faster rate, it's not about the state of your metabolism being fast or slow. It's really about the rate that those cells turn things in. And I find this really helps us understand why some people can feel amazing and have mental clarity off of like a more ketogenic, lower carbohydrate diet, and other people can feel unwell and sick, and why some people can feel all glowy and wonderful on like a plant-based vegan diet while other people look sick from that vegan diet. So when we think about metabolic typing, if you are a fast oxidizer, we would call it. So if your cells turn food into fuel really quickly, then we want to look towards eating slower burning fuel. And that's, more red meats, higher purine proteins, probably a lower carbohydrate diet, but higher fats and higher protein. Whereas if you're a slow oxidizer, you're going to feel a lot better from eating what we call faster burning fuel. So probably more complex carbohydrates, lighter proteins. And it just helps work with the body's system. And it really helps us understand kind of the basic fuel mixture we want to work with so that we can feel full and satisfied and give our body what she needs and he needs in between our meals. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And how do you determine if how do you determine someone's metabolic type?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a great book called Metabolic Typing, and the test is right in there. You can pay to have the test done. But I love a really simple, and this is something I do with my clients to get a more elaborate picture. But there's a really simple self-test that you can actually do at home to have a rough understanding of whether you're a fast or a slow oxidizer. And that is simply to like when in the afternoon, maybe when you might be able to have a snack. So you don't want it to be your meal, but maybe mid-afternoon, you would either choose to have something like an orange or a piece of meat. And specifically the orange I find helpful. If we have an orange, this is a fast burning fuel. It's a carbohydrate. And when we have that carbohydrate, if you pay attention after you have that as a snack, if you pay attention to your body an hour or two later, if you feel good and you're like, oh, I feel really good, you're likely what we call a slow oxidizer, because it needs that faster burning fuel so that you don't get all sluggish and bogged down trying to get through it. If you feel jittery or hungry already or a low energy crash, that is a better indicator that you're what we call a fast oxidizer, and that eating straight up simple carbohydrates or too many carbohydrates can really make you kind of drag your body down and throw off your blood sugar levels.
And do you find that more people are one or the other, slow oxidizer or fast oxidizers?
No, I find it's pretty in the middle. There is something we call a mixed oxidizer as well. And it's funny when you think about like where this stems from and where the research came from was like looking at obviously where we come from genetically in the world. And it helps explain why, you think about certain parts of the world where maybe in the way north when there's not a lot of vegetables available. We're talking like, rich seal meats and rich fats that way. So genetically, that's what people were, evolved to work with at their body versus, certainly parts in Asia when we see people with diets much higher in like rice and vegetable, a higher protein diet a higher carbohydrate diet, and proteins are more expensive. So they have adapted that way. So I do find it pretty split, but this mixed oxidizer kind of comes into play a lot as well. That's what I am. And we see that a lot, I think, certainly people coming from Eastern or from Europe or Western Europe, like in England, Ireland, Scotland, where you're having a good mix. You've got some meat and some fish and some potatoes and some vegetables, right? So we have that mixed combo in there. And I do find it's pretty split. But if you are a fast oxidizer and you're not eating a higher protein diet, it's a real struggle for you to feel well and therefore to lose weight or feel your best or optimize your hormones, and vice versa for slows.
Yeah, I don't know if you do or if you're familiar with hair testing, because some hair testing looks at like slow versus fast
Yes.
oxidizers. And so,
Jimmy,
yeah,
yeah, this is different from that in a way, and not in a way. It is a different. It's called the same thing. Like we oxidizers mix it fast and slow, but it is a different theology and a different result.
okay, that's good to know. But so it sounds like though, ideally you would want to be a mixed oxidizer like you are in a
I
perfect
don't know
world,
if
or
it's ideal. Yeah, I think it's not necessary. I find in some ways being a mixed oxidizer is easier because then we have a bit more fluidity and option. However, it's not as direct. So when I'm working with my clients and they're a mix, they're like, well, what do I eat then? It can be more confusing. Whereas it's a little
Mm,
bit more cut and dry if you're a fast or a slow. You're like, you're going to need, a higher this or a lesser that. And most importantly, I find it really helpful to give us a starting point for the macronutrient fuel mixture. If you're a fast oxidizer, we likely want to be having a minimum of 30 grams of protein in our meals. If you're a slow oxidizer, we can probably get away with more of like a 20 grams of protein and making it up with a little bit more carbohydrates and some fat. And if you're a mixed, we can kind of sit in the middle there. You might feel just as well on either side of those. But that's where it becomes very bio-individual. And we have to just pay attention, which I think at the end of the day is the name of the game. Listen to your own body. That's where your answers are.
yep, that is true. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Let's talk about stress. So stress also is important. And we spoke about sleep also, which about when it comes to stress, how does stress impact the hormones, and how important is it to do things to manage the stress, or at least manage the perception of stress in order to have healthy hormones?
Yeah, I think it's critically important to try to, manage that quickly. One, I think stress is the biggest energy sucker of our body. And so when we're kind of coming back to that example of health debt, if we want to reduce the demand on the body, we want to reduce stress to the body for sure. And at the same time, we want to have capacity for stress, right? If we have capacity and bandwidth and reserves for cortisol or stress in the body, that's going to allow us to handle the aging process, the shifting of these hormones that we know are happening in perimenopause and menopause. So lots of things there. But when our cortisol is elevated, that is like the body's alarm system of saying, okay, we need to manage this life-altering, life-threatening situation. And so as a result, it suppresses the sex hormone production at that time. And I mean, as you know, our bodies are designed to handle stress like not chronically, but acutely, like in a short term, so that we can survive. What we see more and more for women, and this also kind of goes to that question of why so many hormone imbalances, we see people under much more chronic stress these days. And that significantly depresses the production of our sex hormones, which is also why we're seeing, I think, symptoms of perimenopause earlier and earlier in women than before. And we're seeing, the impact of that. I mean, as you know, the adrenals and the thyroid work quite closely together. We're seeing some, major impacts on those. And of course, the sex hormones are really impacted by the thyroid hormones. So it massively matters how we manage stress in our lives and also how we reduce it, because it's not just our emotional stress and maybe stress from us staring at screens all the time and stress from, the fact that social media can tell us all the scary things going on in the world at any given second. It's also the stress happening in our body from the food we're eating, from whatever dysbiosis might be in the gut, from the environmental toxins we're exposed to that might be impacting, again, the liver and all of these pieces. So long-winded answer, Dr. Eric, it significantly makes all the difference. My whole process with my clients is always, how do we reduce the call to cortisol in your body? How do we reduce stress and your brain's experience of stress?
Yeah, it's important. Like you said, there's that adrenal thyroid relationship where, I mean, there are numbers of factors that could affect the conversion of T4 to T3, and one of those is having the high cortisol. Gut and liver also play a big role with that conversion as well.
Yeah.
And I like what you said, that it's not just the emotional stressors, which, I mean, is a big factor, but all these other things act as stressors as well.
Yeah.
And I give, sometimes I'll share my story. When I was dealing with Graves, or prior to my diagnosis, I was overtraining. So that was also putting a lot of a big stressor on my body. And I don't know if we'll talk about testing, but um, I think you do adrenal testing, like saliva or Dutch testing, things like that. So,
Absolutely.
so I did back then in 2008, it was a adrenal saliva test, and my cortisol was in the tank, my DHA was in the tank. And I mean, it's hard to know, was it more due to the overtraining than an emotional stressors? I mean, I'm sure it was a combination of each, but definitely I was working out too hard and I wasn't listening to my body. So I agree with everything you said. And again, sleep, you mentioned earlier, like how you weren't sleeping, and that I'm sure that wasn't helping in your pursuits of having happy hormones at the time. And now, like you said, things are a lot better. You're sleeping better. And it's probably no coincidence that you mentioned that you feel better now in your 40s than you did in your 20s, right?
Yeah, I sleep way like more appropriately now, I'd say, than I did in my 20s. And I can relate to that. Like that was part of my issue, was my cortisol was in the toilet. So it felt like, oh, is this perimenopause? But ultimately, I always say, like, so many women are, I think perimenopause gets a bad rap. Like our sex hormones get blamed, but they're really just like the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. Who's throwing off the messenger? For most women, especially under 48, the sex hormones might be off, but it's probably not because you can't produce the amount of sex hormones that you need. It's likely because something else is causing a problem. And of course, the shifting of these hormones into retirement, we'll call it, is a stress on the body. That's like, whoa, I can't even handle this stress, and you're throwing another thing at me. So it gets challenging.
Yeah, it definitely does. I want to get your opinion on fasting, because so we're going back to the diet a little bit, and just, I mean, there's so many different perspectives on fasting. And, again, like some will, obviously there are some advocates of fasting, and then there are some who are, I won't say against fasting, but I'm bringing this up because we'll talk about stressors, and some are concerned that, like, extreme fasting especially might be a stressor on the body. So I guess I just want to get your perspective. Like, what do you think about fasting? Like, do you fast? Do you recommend for your patients to fast or your clients to fast?
That's a great question. So What I use for myself and what I recommend for my clients is like a typical nighttime fast and fasting in between meals. I think when we're talking about our sex hormones in a time when we know the body's under more stress than usual, our first line of defense against calling on more cortisol is regulated blood sugar. If you wake up in the morning as a woman when our cortisol should be getting its highest spike and we don't eat, that means we don't have glucose coming in. So the body's calling on more cortisol. Now we're having more cortisol. And then you're having a coffee, there's more cortisol. And then you're working out, there's more cortisol. And then we're not eating again until like lunch. You are massively impacting your sex hormones in a very negative way and your adrenal hormones. So in my practice and with myself and my clients, I feel very strongly that we eat within 2 hours of waking, that we eat enough in that meal to last us 4 to 5 hours, and 4 to 5 hours for lunch, and then 4 to 5 hours for dinner. And if for whatever reason life gets in the way and we need a snack, we have a snack. Because I find, let's say you wake up at 6 a.m., you eat breakfast at 8, you have your dinner at 6 p.m. I mean, that's a 14-hour fast plus 4 to 5 hour fast in between those meals. And that seems to support the body in a much better way. And sometimes we need, in order to regulate that blood sugar, depending on what's going on in the gut and the body, sometimes we need a snack at night in order to be able to sleep through the night, which is kind of priority number one. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question there, I see the value of fasting when it's done appropriately for women, but not during the time of day when we need the most energy. We need to give the body, again, what she needs in order to do this big job that she's doing in general.
Yeah. Okay. I like the response. I think that's a good response. I think, everybody's different. There are some people that might seem to be doing fine with like 16/8 fast or occasional 24-hour fast. But I think a big concern is having such a small eating window. Like you said, like during the day, like that's when you want to make sure you get the nutrients and the protein. And, over the years, I've had some people I've worked with where they're doing like 20-hour fast, like on a regular basis, not just like every now and then. And I mean, if you have like even an 18-hour fast, like regularly, that's like only a 6-hour eating window. So it's difficult to get the nutrients and the protein you need. And it also, I think it could be a stressor on the body as well. So in other ways.
Yeah, like you said, it's very bio-individual. And I think if you're coming in, if you're in a place in your body where your health is solid, the foundations of your health are solid, you feel really good, and you want to play with like tools and hacks to test it out, it could be something that might be beneficial for you. Only you will know if you try it. But if you're trying to use it when you're in a health debt situation, when you're having these symptoms and your PMS is off and you can't lose weight naturally and you're feeling really exhausted, I think that's a time to maybe use that more extreme fasting for another time in your life when you're solid.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about building muscle. So how can women build muscle mass? If you are looking to do everything you can to save your thyroid, in addition to watching my videos on YouTube, you also might want to subscribe to my free online newsletter, which is called Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid. Not only will you get the latest news on how to heal your gut and restore your thyroid health, but during each edition, I'll demonstrate a different blood or functional medicine test marker that relates to healing your gut and or your thyroid. There will also be an Ask Dr. Eric section where not only can you see questions that other people have asked related to gut and thyroid health, but you can also submit a question for me to answer in a future edition. To subscribe to the Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid newsletter, please visit SaveMyThyroid.com/newsletter.
Yeah. So I'm obviously, as a trainer, I think, putting on lean muscle is like the gold standard for protecting our hormones, protecting our body. It's like wrapping our body in armor. One, we have to make sure we have the energy to handle that stressor. You and I both have already shared how over-exercising was actually doing the opposite for us. So one, I always like to first make sure our basics are in place for women. Do we have enough sleep happening? Like we need at least 7 hours of sleep to be able to repair from like muscle, create muscle synthesis. So one, let's make sure that's in place. Let's make sure our nutrition is on. Let's make sure we get just functional movement in a day. I'm not sure about you, but for me, I spend a lot of time sitting in front of a computer working with clients. So I need to make sure I'm like just getting up and like for lymphatic drainage, for my mindset, for actually just walking and moving the body. And I think these are kind of no matter what things that have to be there first. And sort of stress management and joy. Once those pieces are locked in, then I think putting on lean muscle at any age, but definitely in perimenopause and menopause, really comes down to, okay, now I have this energy, this additional energy, because my foundations are in place. I'm not in debt. And where do I want to invest this energy? And what we see, and what I've seen in myself and my clients, is that the best use of your energy is going to be in resistance training. So in weightlifting or in some body weight resistance training. And to be kind of specific about it, I find, 3-4 days a week of resistance training complemented by really good like flexibility and mobility training is enough to really make a difference and put on that lean muscle. And during that process, you can notice, oh, am I hungrier now? Great. Maybe I need to support with more protein, which our body needs to create the muscle. So it can be staged and simple for women, but it is so critical because once our ovaries retire, our adrenals are going to be producing some of those hormones, and the rest is coming from our tissue. So we want to put on that lean muscle as long as we have the energy and capacity to do so.
And how long personally do you train when you do the resistance exercise? Is it like 30 minutes? Is it an hour?
So I typically do a 45-minute workout, but I'd say 15 minutes of that is like mobility and stretching, whether it's on the front or back end. So about a 30-minute lift is what I do. And that is enough for most women, unless you're trying to win a competition. And then you're going to need more.
Okay, yeah. I definitely need to work more on the flexibility, mobility training. So
Yeah.
my wife does a pretty good job, I think, in that area. So she probably needs to do more of the resistance. I need to do, I won't say less of the resistance, but incorporate some more of
Yeah.
the flexibility, mobility training. So
It's an important piece that a lot of us overlook because the strength of our muscle is always going to be limited by the elongation and flexibility and elasticity of it. So if you are doing one without the other, you're going to hit a plateau. If you are complementing the two, so for me, I like, 2 days of resistance training to 1 day of like solely flexibility and mobility. I find that it really helps make all the difference and keeps our body happy and kind of our nervous system calm.
and this is a selfish question I'm going to ask for me. Like, so if I wanted to start with flexibility, or again, I'm sure others listening to this also are not doing their flexibility, mobility. So it's not just me, but some of the
Not just
listeners too
you.
aren't
Oh,
doing so. So for anyone listening, including me, who's, obviously not just listening, but
yeah.
talking to you about this. So where would you start? Like, personal trainer, YouTube videos,
Mm.
like, again, like probably not on your own. I mean, yeah. So what's some advice you would
Yes,
give?
hard to know what to do. I think one, it's always good to ask yourself how you feel about this stuff. A lot of people, when I say like go do yoga, they roll their eyes and groan, especially my athletes, and I think, and maybe you, I don't know, but they're like, because there's so much beauty and like value in doing yoga. But I think for athletes, that quietness doesn't feel very productive. And like there's a lot of noise that comes up in your head when you are not used to more stillness. So if that's how you're feeling, I think looking for workout programs or going to a mobility stability class that is around like myofascial release with a roller, or that's more athletic stretching and mobility, can be easier to get into. Or if you haven't tried yoga, I would recommend doing that. So I have been a long time user of like online workouts. I just work out at home because I find that's the most efficient thing for me. Not some people really love the environment of being somewhere else. So I think my suggestions are know thyself a little bit in what you
Yeah.
want. If you are not someone who's going to be motivated on your own, go look at the local gyms or the local community center or the local classes and find a mobility, stability, and like stretch class to go to regularly, or a yoga class. I mean, there's hundreds of yoga classes around. I would go to the class because then you'll have an instructor to help guide you in the process.
Yeah, good advice. Yeah, there's the stretch labs now that are like
Yes.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, and you're right, yoga. I mean, I like working out at the gym. I mean, I like working out at home. I just don't get the same workout at home than I do when I go to the gym. So that's why, I go to the gym, and I do have a personal trainer, but we don't do, I guess if I asked him to focus more on flexibility, mobility training, but I haven't. But they have also classes at the gym that we go to too. And it's funny, like a few weeks ago, my wife was like a Sunday morning. She's like, "You want to go to yoga, like a yoga class with me?" And I'm like, "No, no, I'm good." So maybe next time I'll say yes to the yoga class. So.
Yes, 2 times a week, Dr. Eric, 2 times.
So, and then when it comes to losing weight, like all this ties into like, obviously building muscle mass is also important for weight loss. And then the metabolic typing you mentioned, is there anything else you want to add when it comes to women looking to lose weight?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we always want to do when we're wanting to lose weight is, again, let's make sure our kindergarten foundations of health are in place. We often skip over these in the pursuit of the seeing of the change in the body. And in order to create stability in a body that for women in midlife is almost like it's on, a floating bridge, right? Like there's just no stability here because these hormones are shifting. We want to create a lot of stability. So before we start, getting into workouts, before we start changing, into a calorie deficit, for example, for fat burning, we need to first really solidify the foundations of our health. And I look at that like a dining table, right, that we eat on that has 4 legs. We've got sleep, we have nutrition, we have movement, and we've got, I'll call it joy, which kind of goes hand in hand with stress management. Sleep is like we need to hold space for at least 7 to 8 hours, if not 9 hours of sleep in a day. If we're not there, it's probably not, the body's not going to be able to lose weight because we need to be able to sleep. That's when our fat burning happens. It's when our hormones get produced. We want to look to, again, that basic functional movement. Before we start stressing the body out with resistance training, we need to make sure we are getting the basics in our walking, in stretching, in just kind of that foundational piece. Look at that nutrition. We have to make sure we're not, that we're kind of cutting out the things that are costing the body more energy than they're providing, so that we have the energy to repair and burn stored fat, and that we're eating consistently. So we kind of already talked about those things. And then stress and pleasure. Like pleasure is a really massive opportunity to bring energy into the body. And if you're stressed, we can't add pleasure. So we need to find ways to manage that in some ways. So if we think about those 4 pillars on, of a table, if one of those legs is rickety, like it's not a very good dining experience. If 2 are rickety, you're not coming back to that restaurant. And if 3 are rickety, your meal's on the floor. So really starting with those foundations first and foremost, and making sure these are like as easy for you as brushing your teeth, I think is priority number 1 for weight loss. Priority number 2, I think, especially in this age box, is noticing maybe where the loss of function has started to happen in your body. Are you pooping every day? Like, do we have, is that digestion good? Is there bloating or gas that we don't know where it came from or don't understand where it came from? Are we waking up multiple times at night? Then we're going to be looking more at the adrenals and at the liver. Are we waking up in a sweat? Like, or are we having a lot of funky PMS? Because that'll speak a little bit more to those sex hormones. So really pay attention to where those weak spots are, and then focus on strategies that work on improving that area first. Because if function is off in the body, as you know, so if the thyroid is off and then we start stressing it out more by cutting calories and putting more fitness on, it'll actually do that opposite for you. We'll start to hold on to more fat and break down our muscle, which can be very confusing for people.
Let's talk a little bit more about gut health. And you just mentioned the importance of like healthy bowel movements, and we chatted a little bit earlier about gut health. So what do you do to help your clients improve the health of their gut, including any, I don't know if you do functional lab testing on everybody with regards to the gut, or if it's just selective, like some people you do stool testing, some people you don't.
Yeah, no, I will. So, I always do a GI map, which is a functional lab test, stool test and you know what it is, but for those listening, it's really a wonderful thing. It certainly rules out things like pathogens and parasites and yeast and fungus. which is helpful. But I almost think the greater value in it is really looking at like the good bacteria and the bad bacteria, the commensal and the opportunistic, to really understand the state and the capabilities and where the weak spots are in the gut. And as well as some good intestinal health markers. So it's a really great lab, and I run it on all of my clients, even if they don't have digestive issues, because I have found over time that for many women, they might not have any digestive issues, but they are not breaking down and absorbing any nutrients. Like their gut is almost like a dry garden. It just doesn't have what it needs. So I think people have kind of genetic weak spots naturally in their body, where some people might have massive GI, distress, and that makes it very easy to say, okay, let's start in the gut. But for a lot of women, when we aren't getting that nutrients, or we're not detoxifying those hormones, we're seeing the downstream effects in the thyroid, in the adrenals, in the sex hormones, and they're experiencing those symptoms, but not the GI issues. So I really like to run that as a good understanding of what's going on and what is our customized strategy to make sure we have a really nourished gut. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you mentioned too. Just because you don't have digestive symptoms doesn't mean you have a healthy gut.
Yeah.
It's
And it's funny. I think what I see most, in my clients who don't have digestive issues, but are, really struggling with sleep, like a lot of more common thyroid, symptoms. Maybe they have a lot of temperature issues in their body. They're very cold all the time. They're losing hair. Is that we are seeing a very depleted gut at that point in time. So we need to kind of re-nourish that so that, we have those minerals and vitamins. And I know you probably speak to this all the time, but in those clients, I really often see very low T3 and a really elevated reverse T3, which makes it so challenging to feel good in your body.
Yeah, definitely agree. So it sounds like you test reverse
Yeah.
T3 in your patients. Do you
Do.
look up? Do you test thyroid in everybody, like in your clients, or just?
I do. So I should say, when I work one-on-one with the client, yes, I really will always start with a GI map, a Dutch, which we talked about, to test adrenals and sex hormones balance, and also detoxification. And then I like to do, a good blood chemistry that has a full thyroid panel, iron, kind of verify some of the sex hormones and the minerals. I really like to see it, like the vitamin D. I like to see the magnesium, zinc, B12, things like that, just to get a better picture of what's depleted and try to get an understanding of root cause a little bit more so we can focus our efforts.
And with the Dutch, when it comes to women in perimenopause, do you recommend just like a Dutch complete, or I mean, they also have the cycle mapping, but like in perimenopause, it might be a little bit challenging with the cycle mapping. Just so is it just a complete Dutch complete that you typically recommend?
Yeah, most of the time I do a Dutch complete. If I have someone who has, maybe they work a lot of shift work and like we just know their cortisol is all over, we can do I think it's called the plus, that where they also do the saliva as well.
Yeah.
But I find the Dutch complete is very thorough for women in this age box, and to really, again, understand like, okay, what's off and why might it be off, and kind of finger point at some other issues. And again, help us kind of create a strategy that works for them in their life to, reestablish calm and balance in the body.
And HRT. So what are your thoughts on specifically bioidentical hormone replacement therapy? Yes, no, depends on the person.
Yes, and depends on the person, I would say, for sure. So I think it can be very beneficial for people. I feel very strongly that we need to make sure those detoxification pathways are clear before we start introducing things like that. So it's really a matter of, again, where are we at? Why are we there? And then would this be a benefit? And it's really independent. But I find it to be like sometimes, if we have a hormone imbalance, like if our estrogen, if our progesterone's okay, but our estrogen is way high because of, a detoxification issue, then when we correct that detoxification issue, often that just comes back into balance and we don't need to add bioidentical hormones. So I think it really is very person to person. And I think we can see that it's more often than not, it's not just the sex hormones, because if it was, we could all just take hormones and feel fine, but that's not the case.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm with you. There is a time and place for hormone replacement therapy, but you want to, like, if someone does a Dutch test, and you're
Mhm.
right, if they have high, let's say 4-hydroxy and or 16-hydroxy metabolites, and
Yeah.
you want to focus on improving the estrogen metabolism. If someone has compromised adrenals, that could also affect the sex hormones, so you want to try to optimize the adrenals. So yeah, definitely agree with what
Yeah.
you said here.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So again, this has been a great conversation. I do want to ask if you have any, and I did warn you I was going to ask you this question, so you had time to prepare as
Yeah.
far as some hormone balancing hacks that you
Yeah.
have.
For sure. I do have a few. I think there's some that I think a lot of us here, I think we've talked about a few of the basic ones that we always want to work at, is just holding that space for sleep, the consistency of eating enough that you feel full and satisfied, like functional movement and things like that. But some of my favorite tools I would say that are very helpful as hacks, I really am a big believer of like waking up and either having like an adrenal cocktail right away. So, a big flush of water, some lemons, some good sea salt in there, and you can Google adrenal cocktail recipes. So really supporting those adrenals first thing in the morning can be a really powerful thing. Or what I love these days is like a good greens juice, so that we're having like a nice like flush of water. We're really fueling that gut, which is going to help support the adrenals too. And I find this makes a massive difference for most women. Wake up, flush the body with water, but with some good nutrients in there. Another one that I find super helpful is electrolytes. I think I run into a lot of women who are drinking all their water, but they're peeing every hour. And, when the body is going through this added workload of perimenopause, we demand more minerals. So really remineralizing with, a good electrolyte, I find one, even two times a day. If you're working out, definitely with your workout, and then maybe a good one in the afternoon. I find that also makes a huge difference in mental clarity, in the calming of the body. It helps with detoxification. So those are two things that I love to use. And then if you are struggling with sleep, like if you are waking up every night between 2 and 4 a.m., try a snack half an hour before you go to bed. Just test out a little snack. Some of my favorites is just like a spoonful of nut butter. And sometimes that alone can make a huge difference, because if our blood sugar is off, whether it's because of how we're eating or maybe it's because of our gut, it's hard to say until we test, like it's going to wake you up, and then it becomes very hard to do anything else if we're not sleeping well. So those are kind of some of my favorite things to do that are very quick and easy and affordable that really move the needle for women.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. With the adrenal tonic, is that something like someone could do then every single day? Like, is that daily?
Yeah,
Okay.
that can be
Yeah.
done every day, first thing in the morning. You're kind of think of it again, like without whatever life is going to throw at you. First thing in the morning is when we're having that highest cortisol spike. And we just want to give the adrenals like a little bit of extra love before, during the time when they're working extra hard.
Yeah, makes sense. And yeah, I guess if it's just water, lemon, and sea salt, no harm in taking that on a daily basis, every first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, wonderful. Well, Bria, this was amazing. You shared a lot of information. Just again, I love this conversation. And anything else before we wrap up? Anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you, or any last words you want to say before I ask you where people could find out more about you?
Yeah, I think, the big message I always want to get across to the women listening is that I think perimenopause happens for us and not to us. And it's like the gift you didn't want, but you needed. This added workload to your body is going to kind of shake down and point out where the problems are. So although it's frustrating and you might not feel like you have the capacity right now to handle the symptoms that are coming up, I think this is your opportunity to do the deeper underlying work, with Dr. Eric or with a practitioner that might specialize in your area, to lock in your health so that you have like the next 4 or 5 decades to feel great. So really try to think of the shift as a gift, this opportunity here to do the real work so that you can feel your best going forward.
All right, wonderful. And as far as where people could find you, your website is bria.com.
Yes.
And you have a big following on Instagram. So yeah, let's I'll let you share with the details, and of course I'll put everything in the show notes. But if you could let us know just now quickly, like where people could find you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, the website is great, or at Bria_period_whisperer on Instagram, or come check out the Period Whisperer podcast, where this is really all we talk about. So if you're in it and you need some more support, it's there for you wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much. Again, this was a really good conversation. Just really enjoyed it. And I'm sure my listeners did as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Eric.
Thanks, Bria.